Deep within a cold, obsidian heart lies a secret that has been protected for an entire lifetime. We break through the hard exterior to find the warmth of humanity that still beats within. Hit subscribe now and discover the mysteries hidden in the dark corners of the soul.
I was reaching for my car keys when my phone lit up on the counter. It was my accountant, Oliver Hess. He'd done my taxes for 3 years, handled my small freelance income, never called me on a Sunday. I almost let it go to voicemail. I picked up. "Don't sign anything today." His voice was flat. Not panicked, worse than panicked. Controlled. "I need you to come to my office first. Can you do that?" I had been about to drive to my brother's house for what he'd called a family meeting. He'd texted me the night before. "Mom's estate stuff, just paperwork. Bring your ID." I turned back from the door. "What did you find?" I asked. Oliver was quiet for 2 full seconds. "Just come in, please. My mother passed 8 months ago. Pancreatic cancer, which moves fast and gives you no time to adjust. No time to say the things you meant to say for years. She was 61. She had a small house in Tucson, a savings account, and a rental property in Phoenix she'd bought in the 90s with money she'd saved from 30 years of nursing. That rental was worth about $400,000 now. Not life-changing wealth for most people. Life-changing for our family. I am the older of 2 children. My brother Chet is 33. I'm 31. We were close once when we were small, when it was just the 3 of us. The money was tight and we shared a room until I was 12. Something shifted when we got older. I noticed it but couldn't name it. He had a way of rewriting things. Small things at first. Who broke the lamp? Who forgot to pick Mom up from her appointment? Little corrections to the record that always put him in the better light. I thought it was just his personality. I let it go. He was my brother. After Mom died, I handled most of the arrangements because Chet said he wasn't in a place emotionally to deal with logistics. I took bereavement leave from my job. I called the funeral home, picked the flowers, wrote the obituary. I cleaned out her house over 3 weekends. I found her documents, organized her filing cabinet, contacted her attorney. Chet showed up for the service, cried loudly, and accepted condolences from people who'd never seen him visit her in the last 2 years of her illness. Her estate went into probate. The attorney, a woman named Ms. Aldridge, walked us through everything. The will left the house and savings split equally between us. The rental property in Phoenix. Mom had indicated she wanted to leave it to me, because I'd helped her manage it for years. I was the one who called the plumber when the pipes burst. I handled the lease renewals. Chet had never set foot in it. The will was clear, or so I thought. Oliver's office was a 15-minute drive. I sat across from him with my coat still on because I couldn't make myself settle. He had a folder on his desk and a laptop open beside it. He turned the laptop to face me first. "This was filed with the probate court 6 days ago," he said. "It was a document, a codicil and amendment to my mother's will, dated 3 weeks before she died. It redirected the Phoenix property entirely to Chet." I stared at I stopped. Started again. "She never mentioned this." "I know," Oliver said. "I know because you showed me the original will 4 months ago, and this contradicts it. But that's not the part I wanted you to see." He opened the folder. Inside were 2 pages, a printout of the codicil, and then a separate sheet he'd had someone examine for him, a forensic document analyst. A friend of his he'd called as a favor. "Look at the signature," he said. I looked. My mother's name, in her handwriting. Except, my mother had a tremor in the last months of her life. Her signature had become shaky, uneven, with a slight drag on the last letter. I'd seen it on her medical consent forms. I'd seen it on the Christmas card she sent in December, 2 months before she died. This signature was smooth, confident. It didn't drag. "That's not her signature," I said. "No," Oliver said. "It isn't." I sat in my car in his parking lot for a long time before I could drive. I kept trying to find an explanation that wasn't what it obviously was. Maybe she'd signed it on a good day. Maybe the tremor came and went. Maybe there was some version of this story, where my brother hadn't forged our dying mother's signature to steal her property. I couldn't find it. I called Ms. Aldridge from the parking lot. She answered on the second ring. And when I explained what Oliver had found, she went very quiet. "Can you come in tomorrow morning?" she said. "Bring everything he has." Then I drove home. I did not go to the family meeting. I did not answer Chet's texts, which came in at 2:14 p.m. "Where are you? We were supposed to do this at noon." And then at 2:47, "This is important. Call me." And then at 4:30, the tone shifting. "Fine. We can reschedule." I sat on my couch and thought about the last 8 months. Little things started rearranging themselves. He had been the one to retrieve Mom's personal files from her house after she died. He'd offered. I'd been grateful. He'd brought me her financial folder. Or what I thought was her financial folder. But now I was wondering what else had been in there. What he'd kept. What he'd replaced. I thought about the notary stamp on the codicil. Someone had to have notarized it. Someone had sat across from my brother, or an accomplice, and pressed a seal onto a document that carried our dead mother's forged name. I thought about Mom in her hospital bed, her hand in mine, telling me she wanted me to keep the Phoenix property because I'd worked for it alongside her. She'd said it out loud. I hadn't thought to record it. Why would I? She was my mother. Miss Aldridge had a colleague, a probate litigation attorney named Mr. Ferris. He joined us Tuesday morning. He reviewed Oliver's documents, made calls during the meeting, stepped out twice. When he came back the second time, he sat down and folded his hands on the table. "The notary on this document," he said, "had their commission revoked 14 months ago. They're not legally authorized to notarize anything. I felt the room tilt slightly. So the document is void, I said. The document has serious problems, he said carefully. We need to verify several things before we make that claim officially. But, yes, this is not a valid codicil. Who is the notary? I asked. He told me the name. I didn't recognize it. Then he showed me the address on file. It was 2 streets over from where Chet lived. I want to stop here and say something about what this kind of discovery does to you, because I don't think people understand it unless they've been through it. It's not just anger. Anger would be cleaner. It's the revision. It's the way every memory you have starts to develop a second layer. A shadow version underneath the one you thought was real. I kept thinking about Chet at the funeral, how he'd held my hand during the service. I kept thinking about the phone calls after she was diagnosed, how he'd cried to me and said he didn't know how he was going to handle losing her. I'd comforted him. I'd told him it would be okay, and somewhere in that same period, he was planning this. The timeline didn't work any other way. I thought about the last time Mom and I had talked about the Phoenix property, about 6 weeks before she died. She'd been clear-headed that day, more alert than she'd been in weeks. She'd held my hand and said, "You've taken care of that place like it was your own. It should be yours." And I'd squeezed her hand and told her not to talk like she was going anywhere yet, because I couldn't stand to hear it. I hadn't thought to record it. But then I remembered something else. My cousin Blythe had visited Mom at the hospice that same week. She'd been there when Mom and I talked. I remembered because she'd stepped out of the room to give us privacy. But she'd been in the doorway for part of it. She'd heard Mom's voice. I called Blythe that night. "I remember," she said, before I'd even finished explaining. "She was so clear that afternoon. She told you twice." I heard her. "Would you be willing to make a statement?" A pause. "Is this going where I think it's going?" "Yes." Another pause, shorter. "Tell me when and where." Mr. Ferris filed a formal challenge to the codicil the following week. He also contacted the county recorder's office and flagged the document. Oliver's forensic contact submitted a written assessment of the signature. Blythe gave a notarized statement about what she'd witnessed. Miss Aldridge pulled the original will in its filing records. Then something happened that I hadn't expected. The title company that had been working with Chet, he had apparently already contacted them about transferring the Phoenix property into his name. Flagged the transaction on their end when they received notice of the probate challenge. They put everything on hold. "Standard procedure," Mr. Ferris said, but it meant Chet couldn't move forward. He must have realized something was wrong, because he texted me. "Have you talked to an attorney?" I didn't answer. "I think there's been a miscommunication about Mom's wishes. Can we talk?" I didn't answer. "I know this is hard. We're both grieving. Let's not make this worse." I showed the text to Mr. Ferris. He told me to stop responding and to save everything. What I didn't know, and what Mr. Ferris uncovered in the following weeks, was that Chet had done something far more layered than forge one document. He had gone into my mother's email account. She'd used a tablet in the hospital, and he'd borrowed it once, to check something, and never properly logged out. And he had deleted 3 emails she'd sent to Miss Aldridge in the final months. Emails in which she'd clarified her wishes about the Phoenix property. Emails that Miss Aldridge had responded to, which were still sitting in Miss Aldridge's outbox but had been scrubbed from Mom's account. Miss Aldridge hadn't thought to raise them because she assumed they were reflected in the existing will documentation. When Mr. Ferris called and asked her to check her sent folder, specifically anything regarding the Phoenix property, she found them within an hour. 3 emails. My mother's words, sent from her own account, describing exactly what she wanted. Chet had deleted them from her end so that if anyone ever checked her account, they'd find nothing. Just silence where her wishes had been. He'd also, Mr. Ferris discovered, accessed of her online banking twice in the 6 weeks after she died. She'd named me joint account holder on her savings, but the account also had a transfer feature Chet had apparently explored. He hadn't moved anything. Maybe he'd gotten nervous. Maybe he'd decided the property was the bigger prize, but the login records were there. When I heard all of this laid out in Mr. Ferris's office, I had a strange, dissociated sensation. Like I was listening to a story about someone else's family. Like the person he was describing couldn't possibly be the boy who'd once climbed into my bed during a thunderstorm and asked me to tell him something funny until he fell asleep. The probate court hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in March. I didn't sleep well the night before. I lay there going over the chain of evidence the way you do when you can't turn your brain off. The signature analysis, Blythe's statement, the deleted emails, the login records, the revoked notary. I kept worrying that it wouldn't be enough, that there would be some gap, some procedural thing I didn't understand, and Chet would find a way through it. I got up at 5 and made coffee and sat at my kitchen table until it was time to leave. The courthouse was quiet that early. Mr. Ferris met me outside and walked me through what to expect. He was calm in a way that professionals develop when they've done this 100 times. Not dismissive, just steady. It helped. The hearing itself was not dramatic in the way you see in movies. There was no shouting, no breakdown, no single moment where everything turned. It was a series of documents reviewed, a series of statements entered into record, a series of quiet questions from the judge. Chet was there with his own attorney. He looked thinner than I remembered. He didn't look at me. The judge examined the forensic report on the signature. She asked 2 questions, both directed at the court, and then she made a brief notation. The revoked notary's information was entered into record. The deleted emails, restored and authenticated by Ms. Aldridge, were submitted. Blythe's statement was submitted. It took about 40 minutes. The judge voided the codicil. She didn't do it dramatically. She just stated it clearly in the flat language of legal proceedings and moved to the next item. The Phoenix property would remain part of the original estate distribution. I would receive it as my mother had intended. I exhaled very slowly and looked at the table in front of me. Chet's attorney requested a recess almost immediately. I don't know what was said between them. I sat in the hallway with Mr. Ferris and a cup of vending machine coffee that tasted like nothing. And I looked at the window at the end of the corridor and thought about my mother. I thought about her hands, how capable they'd been. She was a nurse for 30 years, hands that could start an IV in a moving ambulance, and then at the end they shook when she tried to hold a pen. I thought about her voice the day she told me she wanted me to have that property. How certain she'd sounded. How I'd tried to change the subject because I wasn't ready to hear her talking about the end. She knew, though. She always knew. She'd made her wishes as clear as she could through every channel she had. She'd written emails to her attorney. She'd told me in front of a witness. She'd put it in her original will. And my brother had gone behind all of it, methodically, and tried to erase her. That was the part that sat in my chest like a stone. Not the property. The erasure. The idea that he'd looked at our mother's last wishes and decided his convenience mattered more. The criminal referral came 6 weeks later. Miss Ferris had flagged the matter to the appropriate authorities early in the process. Will fraud, forgery, unauthorized access to a deceased person's accounts. I'd assumed it would go nowhere, that these things moved slowly and often stalled. But apparently the combination of the forged signature, the revoked notary, and the documented email deletions made the case relatively straightforward to build. Chet was charged with 2 counts of fraud and 1 count of forgery. I found out when Mr. Ferris called me on a Wednesday afternoon. I was at my desk at work, headphones in, editing a spreadsheet. He said it simply, in about 30 seconds. I thanked him, hung up, and sat very still for a moment. Then I went to the break room and stood at the window looking out at the parking lot. It wasn't relief, exactly. Or it was relief. But it was the kind that feels almost indistinguishable from grief. The kind you get when something is finally over, and being over means it was real. It happened. Your family was this. I didn't post about any of it online. I didn't call people to share the news. I told Blythe, who said, good, in a quiet and absolute way. I told Oliver, who said he was glad he'd called me on that Sunday. I told my closest friend who had been listening to me process this for months and who simply said, I'm so sorry it had to go this far. The Phoenix property is mine now. I visited it in April, just to walk through it. The tenants are a young couple who've been there 4 years. They keep the small back garden tidy. There's a rosemary bush by the gate that Mom planted herself the first year she owned it. I stood in the driveway and looked at it for a while. I hadn't been able to make myself go there since she died. Too much of her in it. But that afternoon it felt different. Less like a wound and more like something she'd left on purpose, placed carefully in my hands. She'd tried to make sure I got it. She'd done everything right. And even when someone came in behind her and tried to undo all of it, the record of what she'd wanted was still there. In emails and documents and the memory of a woman standing in a hospice doorway, listening. The truth doesn't disappear just because someone tries to delete it. That's what I learned. It goes somewhere. Into a sent folder. Into a witness's memory. Into the drag of a pen that a dying woman's hand couldn't quite make smooth anymore. It waits. And it's enough.